Hi, my name's David Dillon. I run Custodian Back Office, a boutique accounting business that specialises in helping architects run better businesses. Welcome to my presentation called The High Performance Architect. Just to put it into context, I run 3 CPD practice management training modules specifically aimed at architects. Now, I'm sure as architects, it's been a long, hard road that you've traveled down to be fully qualified and then start your own business. I'm sure that you hoped and expected to be well rewarded at the end of that. But the simple fact is, the majority of small architecture practices struggle. And I think one of the reasons is because the people that you do business with, the project managers, the builders and the developers, are often far more commercially savvy than architects are. This course is designed to give you some insights from a 30-year experienced chartered accountant about how architecture practices should be managed to improve profitability. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
So we know that any successful business has an ecosystem that comprises the 5 pillars of finance, which is strategy, budget, forecasting, reporting, and cash flow. Architecture firms are no different. You need to be managing all of those things or you simply can't manage your business. Now, how does that specifically relate to an architecture practice? So to give you a little bit of background, we know that the best architecture practices, the ones that are at the center of excellence, we know that great things happen at the intersection of people management, project management, and profitability management. So what do I mean by that? Well, effective project management is often the difference between a profitable firm and a struggling firm. It's got nothing to do with the firm's design capabilities or documenting capabilities. It's simply that they're not managing the balance between the scope, the time, the cost, and the quality. Often it's usually just one of those elements that's out of whack, but they have to work in harmony. The second one, people are your greatest asset. Obviously you want the best people, but more important than that, you need to get the best from your people. There's an old saying in sport that a champion team will always beat a team of champions. And often that comes down to the motivation. So to really manage your people well, you need to understand what you need to do to attract them, to retain them, and also motivate them. Finally, profit management. First thing is, profit is not a dirty word. Profit is absolutely essential to any business, funding its growth, funding its development of capabilities. And as far as profitability goes, there are a number of key performance metrics that you can use to monitor the health of your business. Things like utilization, the multiplier, and the overhead rate. And what that'll allow you to do is to hone in on those areas where you've got problems. I won't dwell on this, but it's, you know, what gives me the right to do a talk on this? Well, I'm a specialist virtual CFO. I've been an accountant for 30 years. I'm a fellow of chartered accountants and CPA. I've done an MBA. Run my own accounting practice for almost 4 years. And part of my 30 years of experience was working with Group GSA through a period in the early 2000s where we doubled the size of the business and were very successful. I've also authored 2 business books. One of them's been published. The next one's still in the process of being published. So essentially what I'm able to do is give you the benefit of somebody with 6 years of insight, 10,000 hours of knowledge of the architecture profession, as well as someone who's had a lot of brings a lot of perspective from having worked in other industries as well. I've got a bunch of clients there, testimonials on my websites from those guys saying what I've done for them. Now, today's program, I want to talk about the three main issues among the three big areas. So it's profitability, project management, and people. We're going to break out and talk about strategic pricing, performance metrics, and cash flow versus profit and the timing differences. We're going to talk about project management, how planning and budgeting, estimating your project costs is critical, what other critical success factors there are, and we're going to talk about earned value as an objective way of looking at your projects to determine if things are going off track and giving some early warning signals. And we're going to talk about people, how we need to align them, engage them and motivate them. We need to talent manage them, and we need plenty of lead time to be able to find the best people that are available in the market at the time. So forecasting becomes really important to work out whether you need to hire or fire. Profit and finance. So the first point about strategic pricing really is about trying to extract or charge the maximum price that you can at all times, and also try and win the most amount of work that you can. So it's important that you understand and get a little bit analytical about your sales funnel. You need to understand the hit rate that you're going to be able to achieve in certain sectors. There's no point chasing work if you don't have the capabilities to win those jobs. You know, that's sort of chasing a dream that you'll never get. You don't want to price yourself out of work either. So to be strategic, you need to map that out into a revenue forecast. And you can look at the peaks and troughs and decide, you know, when you've got a trough that you need to get a job, and you might have to go in with a lower fee to win that job, to fill that hole. Or if you've got plenty of work on, you can afford to price it higher. And if the client really wants you to do the job, they'll pay it, and you can just manage it. I'll give you a simple analogy there about a carpenter that goes around doing pergolas for people. When he's got a lot of work on, he will price that quite high. When all the carpenters have got, you know, there's a lot of building work going on, they're all pricing high because they've got plenty on. Now, if they get it, that's when they get excited, because they would much rather the high fee paying job. They'll then look to maybe cast off one of their lower ones, or they'll push them back and say, you know, no, I'm not starting this week. It'll be in a month's time. I've got another job come on. But you can't do that unless you have visibility about what's in front of you, and you've got the lead time to make the adjustments. Now, the second point is the commercial nature of the fee. So when the principals or whoever it is in your firm that goes out and wins work go out, they have to price to market. So some days they'll go out and sell a job for $100,000. Other days they'll sell an identical job to the same client at a different time, so a different market essentially, and they might sell that for $80,000. Now, it's the same job. It's a competitive process, winning and losing jobs and putting proposals and tenders in for work. So, but it's important to note that the fee itself is a negotiated exchange of value between the customer and the service provider or the architect. So the fee is not the project cost budget. That means the job that was sold for 100,000 doesn't have a different budget to the job that was sold for 80. If it can be done for 80, it gets done for 80. And the principal will gain 20,000 on the $100,000 job. He may have to, in a month's time or 2 months' time, he may have to sell that 80,000 job for 60,000. So it probably all averages out in the long run, but you just have to be strategic about it. You might want to discount to go into a new sector, or discount to take on a new client. Now, those sort of loss leader jobs, you know, if it meant spending $25,000 to be able to market the images from doing a fantastic job, then would you spend 25,000? You probably would. And then that capability sits on your balance sheet for you to leverage against future jobs. Now, the next point, key performance metrics. This is a little bit like getting the planets to align. The high performing firms, they all have key performance metrics that are in the following sort of range. But what these allow you to do is get an immediate insight into the problem areas of the business, and then allow you to go in there and dig deeper and not waste time looking in areas that don't need looking at. So these high performing firms have utilization between 65 and 70% at a minimum. They aim for a minimum multiplier of around 3, an overhead rate of less than 1.4, and a revenue per technical person of about $210,000 per person. So if that utilization drops below that, then that means you're not charging enough time to the jobs. Now, I hear some people say, you know, I can't charge that time to the job, it'll kill the job. If that time is otherwise unproductive, it's going to kill something. So, you know, the point to really take home from utilization and how that impacts profit, it's very sensitive. And we'll look at that when I do the live demo in a minute with the P&L. But you'll see by tweaking the utilization rate, it can have a dramatic impact on the bottom line. So typically architects are good at looking at project costs in their costing. They're good at looking at admin costs. They're not very good at managing the marketing. So, you know, some firms have a huge marketing spend and they're using very expensive resources to do some, you know, basic sort of marketing and not getting many results from it. So whenever I see low utilization, my first thing is I want to see the detail and find out who's not charging. And often that low utilization is not because of the everyday workers. It's because the principals and the top associates and associate directors and what have you are spending too much time marketing for not enough results. If the multiplier drops below 3, it generally indicates that you're either selling too cheaply or you're doing out of scope work for free and not charging variations. And then the final point on cash flow management. So forward billing is great for cash flow management, but you need to smooth the P&L out by putting the work that you haven't yet earned or the money that you haven't yet earned into the balance sheet. If your client is willing to pay you for money for work that you haven't yet done, then that's a great client and you would always accept that money, but don't count it as profit until you've earned it. So I often see that with firms where they might lose money this month, lose money next month, and then they make a whopping big profit when they finally do the invoicing. But that's not the way it needs to be done. You need to match the earnings with the costs to give you a true indication of the performance of the business. And finally, it's worth noting that there's a cash lag often with milestone billing. You start on a job and you maybe have a milestone for the first lot of billing at the end of the schematic design or the DA or whatever it is. Those milestones billings often put a lot of pressure on the cash flow, but there are funding arrangements that you can get, short-term funding, debtor funding. It's more just being aware of it, you know, that it's almost like a gestation period often when you win that job before you see the cash come in. And, you know, don't be passive about it. you need to manage your client to make sure that you get that money. I've seen it time and time again where people are a little bit hesitant. They don't want to upset the client. But the point there is that amateurs do things for free. Professionals shouldn't be embarrassed about asking to be paid for what they do. What we've got here is an example company data that I've put in. Now, this firm has about 40 people, and they're turning over about $8 million, and they're making almost $1.2 million in profit. Now, they're using a multiplier of 3, and they've got utilization of almost 65%. So you'll see that up here where the arrow is. They've got a overhead rate of 1.38, so it's just under the 1.4. So this is almost the perfect example of a firm where all the planets are aligning. I just wanted to show you a couple of things. So how this is all built up, other than the overheads, it really is geared around, 65% of the costs are roughly staff costs. So we come back to a quite a detailed schedule here of staff, and we have positions and what their salary is. We come up with a utilization target for each person, and then we've got the multiplier as well. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out some of this productive salary cost. So that is, this is time that's been, this guy here, so pastry cook, has 75% of their time is going to projects. So out of the 136 gross salary, which is everything, base plus super, plus any allowances and that sort of thing, out of that, 75% of their time is going to projects. So 93,750 is going towards that utilization. Now, if we take that out, we'll go back and have a look and see what does that do at the summary. Well, the multiplier is still 3, but that utilization has dropped from 64 down to 58. And what that's meant is that this firm, all of a sudden, instead of earning 1.2 million, it's virtually halved. I'll just do that again. Undo that. So we'll go back here. We're at 64. We're at 1.2. And simply by taking out these 3 guys here, we're effectively reclassifying them from being productive fee-earning people to being an overhead. It has the same effect as if we'd reduced the, everyone's overhead or everyone's utilization. If I'd have done that to everyone, just picked on those 3, and we average out at 58% utilization, that's the sort of difference that it makes. Now, another thing we could do is let's drop the multiplier back down to 2.7. So we'll leave the utilization as it is. We drop the multiplier down and we're going to earn less money. So we come back here, the utilization is still fine, but we've earned much less revenue. So now we're only earning 593,000. So what this can be a function of is the lower multiplier can tell you that the either the fees are too low, you're not factoring in everything that you need to do, or you're working outside of your scope. So you're not charging variations where you should be, because that multiplier should be up to 3. So you're cheap at 2.7. Everyone's working very hard, but you're not making much money. The other one was where we took off the utilization. I'll just quickly do that again. And here you're actually generating, good sort of fees, but you're spending either too much time on general office or marketing. And what I tend to see when it comes to analysing this stuff with architects is that they're usually pretty good at looking at the project costs, but they're not so, and they're pretty good at looking at admin costs as well. Those two stick out. But there seems to be quite a grey area when it comes to marketing. And I've heard people from time to time say, look, I had to charge that to marketing because it would kill the project. My argument is that if you're earning those sort of dollars, whatever you do has to be effective. If it's marketing, it has to be effective. If you're earning those sort of dollars and you're not effective, it's going to kill whatever you charge it to. It's either going to kill the company or kill the job. So there's no hiding from the fact that people need to be productive. People need to be productive and charging to jobs to make money. Okay, so we move on to people and culture. And it's really about, it's important to align people. What does that mean? Well, you've got cultures and values. You know, you want to have a high performance culture. But you've also got to be mindful of the wellness of your employees as well. That's becoming more and more prevalent. People becoming conscious of that. If you push people too hard, if you're only offering them, you know, a seat to sit in, then you find that you'll have high staff turnover. You'll have people that won't buy into your culture and values. They're not aligned. And if they're not aligned, they're not going to be terribly productive. One of the things that you could probably talk about there is, you know, people that tend to, you know, to cruise around in second gear rather than top gear. So how do you do that? Well, you've got to engage them. You've got to show leadership. You've got to understand the difference between leadership and managing. And a good way of telling if your staff are engaged or not is typical barbecue conversation. So you hear somebody say, I'm an architect. The difference between that and saying, I work for custodian back office or I work for Google, it's the difference between somebody who's engaged in their company or not. So I wonder, you know, what will your staff say? And motivation. You need to understand motivation. People are all different. Some people respond to a tickle on the tummy, some don't. Generally speaking, rewards and incentives, according to Hertzberg, who was an expert in this field, don't actually motivate people. They're a hygiene factor. You have to have the money right, or it can work as a you know, a non-motivator. But money itself won't motivate people. They soon adjust and consider themselves worthy of it, and they just normalize their behavior. So it's important to tap into and give people the ability for their intrinsic motivation to shine. So that is, you know, delegating, allowing people, you know, to really do their thing and not stifle them. And so talent management, it's important. Obviously recruiting and retaining staff is very important, but staff want more than that. Staff want to be trained. Staff want to know that there's a succession plan there. And it's also important, you know, to understand your capabilities. When you need to hire people, you need to know what sort of people are going to complement the skills you've already got. Where do you have a gap? You know, you don't want to double up on documenting skills if you're short on design. It's all pretty, you know, self-explanatory, I guess, but where it really comes home is at pay review time. You need to know who you're going to be able to reward and who doesn't sort of deserve that so much. If the squeeze is really on and you need to let people know, it's good to know which ones You don't want to be letting people go on a last on, first off basis necessarily. You want to keep the best people that you've got and look after them. And forecasting and lead time. So you can use your revenue per person target and divide that back in to your revenue forecast and come up with some sort of capacity or understanding about what capacity you're going to need at a certain point in time in the future. So that gives you early warning signals whether you need to find people or let people go. And it takes time. Good people take time to find, and you're only going to get the good people that are in the market at the time. So the more time you've got, the better the outcome you'll get. And now for project management. So project management involves managing scope, schedule, quality, resources, customer satisfaction, and risk. Generally, architects aren't trained in project management at uni. It's overwhelming at times. They're trying to manage all of those things as well as, keep a customer happy and deliver the job on time, on budget. The saying that I hear a lot of architects talk about is, oh, we always spend half the fee finishing the last 20% of the work off. That just tells me that at the 80% completion stage, when you thought you were at 80% completion, you were only at 50%. So you don't really understand that whole concept of managing costs and scope. The best way to do that is earned value analysis. So no more spent 50% of the fee finishing the last 20% of the job off. It's an objective measure that's applied to a subjective process, and it still relies on estimations and professional judgment, but it's better than just assuming that every dollar spent is a dollar earned. Done correctly, it's a tool that can help you identify out of scope effort or scope creep. It can ring early warning alarm bells that things aren't, you're either slipping behind schedule or you're burning money. Firms that adopt earned value analysis give themselves a much better chance of sustainable financial performance than those that don't. So there's a number of elements to it. The image here where the arrow is, that is showing how you would set out a work breakdown structure. You would break the project out into the various stages and the elements of the stages. It's like a mini budget. But if you don't do that, if you just go out and win the job and bring it back in and say to somebody, look, the fee's 100 grand, that's all I could get, make it work, it never does work like that. So this way you build it from the bottom up and you come up with a price. There's actually a whole bunch of ways you can common sense check that against a square meter rate perhaps. You've got similar construction value projects in the past. You can compare against what the costs were there. It gives you a real idea of what you're up against in terms of cost. And you should always try and build into that an allowance of about 15% for project management, because it does take time and effort. Don't just concentrate on the productive drawing work. The bottom image there is an earned value chart. And there's 3 lines there that tell you what's going on. The first one is a plan, the budget. Nothing ever goes to plan, but then you map your actual costs against that, and more importantly, your estimate of earned value. That's then what's able to give you perspective and relativity about whether you're earning money or not. And by using the actual and earned value, taking the differences from them, you can work out your cost variance and your schedule slippage. Now I'll just go to a appendix at the back, which breaks that out more, and quickly talk about that. Okay, so what we can see from this one here, that if we draw a line for June and measure it off, so our blue line says that's what we'd plan to do. We'd plan to spend about 70 grand. We'd plan to be close to 45% complete at that point in time. But here we're mapping 50% of our actual costs, yet we've only done 36% of the work. So we've got a 14% cost overrun already, and we're not even at 50%. And we can also work out the schedule slippage. We can say that we expected to be at 36% in May. It's June. So we are actually 1 month behind as well. So that's the sort of, that image alone can help you graphically chart how you're going, and it becomes very obvious when things are off track. Now, so at this point, we're behind and we're spending money too quick. So you need to dig down and find out why. What are we doing? Are we actually doing work from future stages? Or are we doing work, are we redesigning work, and is it rework because of our mistakes? Or is it stuff that the clients, noise that the clients introduced and changed things? And that's cost us to do extra work, whereas we should have had a variation to the client would bridge that gap. So just a little bit more discussion. A dollar spent is not a dollar earned. A dollar earned is relative to that commercially negotiated outcome of value. If the client says that, I agree for you to do that job for $100, right? Then a dollar earned is 1% of that task. Who pays for inefficiency? Well, the firm does, right? If you can do work, I'll give you a quick example. Rolls-Royce use 12 cowhides to fit out the interior of their cars. And they're very expensive cars, obviously. If they started using 14 hides, there would be alarm bells ringing in that factory. Because if you could do it for 12 and still charge the same amount as you're doing with 14, then that's just wasted profit. You can't pass that on to the client. If the client is happy to pay the extra, he doesn't really care how many hides you're using. And it's the same for architecture. Who pays for your inefficiency? You do. It comes off your bottom line. Another point is that left to their own devices, people naturally gravitate towards things that they enjoy. Things that they're good at as well, usually. So that really talks to knowing what your staff are supposed to be doing and leading them and giving them clear instruction, because architects love drawing things. If I ask an architect, what's your definition of success for this job? Most of them are going to turn around and say, well, I want to win an award. I'd like to be published. I want a happy client, repeat client. I want to leave a legacy behind. And already, we've run through 4 or 5 of these things, but nobody's mentioned we want to be profitable so that our firm can survive and invest in capabilities for the future. Another point you might want to look at is a thing called Parkinson's law. Parkinson discovered that If you give somebody a day to do a job, they'll do it over a day. Give them half a day, they'll still do it. They'll do it in half a day though. So the work fills the allotted time. And, architects left to their own devices will just keep drawing and drawing and drawing and chasing perfection, but they'll never find it. Sometimes you've just got to rule the line and say that's good enough. Another point is, do you know how much the job costs when you buy it? I see architects doing this all the time, going out and pricing to market, but having no idea what it's going to cost them to actually deliver it. And the funniest part for me about that is that none of those architects would go to the shop and buy anything without knowing the price. Yet they'll go out and buy a $200,000 job without knowing how much it's going to cost. And finally, a thing I came across last year, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is where people with a small amount of expertise can have a huge amount of confidence. So be careful when your staff tell you, yeah, I can do that. Often that it's a false confidence, and the more they learn about what they're doing, the more they understand that it's a lot harder to do.
Well, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you've learnt some things about how to better manage your people, projects and profits and run a better practice. If anyone wants to reach out to me, my name's David Dillon. I run Custodian Back Office, and you can find us at www.custodianbackoffice.com. Thanks very much.